Fellow football fanatics. This is College Football with Sam, and I wanted to go live earlier in the day, but we're live here and we're live now, and I'm going to give you 5 additional previews that we didn't get to yesterday. Tomorrow will be a pretty big show. We'll go live at the latest at 6 p.m. tomorrow, our usual time, just because I actually am feeling better. I felt better when I'm going live earlier in the day. It feels more rewarding. I might change my schedule to try to go live earlier in the day. So we'll see. I might go live before 6 p.m. tomorrow, but no later than 6 p.m. tomorrow to close out the week with 10 reasons why, with Michigan State, LSU, and Florida coaching carousel conversations, talking about who I think the national title contenders are right now, and some other things too, like an early Oregon, Iowa preview and some other things that I haven't even decided I want to talk about yet, but will in the next 24 hours. Anyway, welcome to the show. We are going to discuss Michigan versus Purdue, Michigan State versus Minnesota, Rutgers versus Illinois. Also taking a look at the world's largest cocktail party between the Georgia Bulldogs and the Florida Gators, and paying some special attention to one of my favorite programs in America, to one of my favorite teams, to a team that loves to kick off late, ex-Pac-12 leader, because they won the Pac-12 2 out of the 3 years before it dissolved. We're going to be taking a look at the Utah Utes hosting the red-hot 7-1, I believe, and undefeated in Big 12 play, Cincinnati Bearcats. Those are the games we're going to be looking at. Make sure, if you haven't already, to like the show, to subscribe to the channel, also hit the notification bell, do all those things, and I would appreciate that a lot. Hi, Asian Posturine. Anyone else who's here, welcome to the chat. If you send a comment early on, I will try to I will try to get to it. But without further ado, let's begin and talk first and foremost about Illinois and Rutgers. This is a matchup that is no longer about the college football playoff, but about conference pride. It will take place at noon Eastern time. Is it right that that's going to take place on NBC? I mean, it wouldn't almost shock me, because this is a pretty weak slate, and not just college football, but in the Big Ten in particular this week. Just making sure that's correct. Yeah, it is correct. My graphic design guy is incredible. Just sometimes when I see something weird, I like to double check that. But he's, his name's Jake. He's pretty incredible. Absolutely incredible, wonderful human being. Shout out to him for making all of this possible. The Rutgers Scarlet Knights travel to Champaign, Illinois to take on the Illinois Fighting Illini, who are reeling after a 42-25 loss to the Washington Huskies on the road. Rutgers is coming off of an electric last-minute victory over the Purdue Boilermakers. They were down early in that game. Looked as if things might spiral out of control, but much like Texas overcoming a vaunted tough effort from Mississippi State, Rutgers overcomes a hard-fought, passionate effort from Purdue, and Purdue is still searching for its first Big Ten victory since the 2023 season. Rutgers has earned their first Big Ten victory of the year, standing at 1-4. Illinois stands at 2-3 in Big Ten conference play. The Illini are favored by a whopping 12.5 points, which, given how Illinois plays, my thoughts on Illinois, the consensus power ratings thoughts on Illinois, I was a little bit shocked by, but Rutgers is indeed viewed by power ratings and models as a bad football team, as a below average team. In the FBS standings, they're probably just average, and in the Power 4 that translates to a football team with plenty of questions. Let's start off by talking about the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. They played Ohio competitively, struggled against Miami of Ohio for about a quarter or two, beat Norfolk State as they should. They competed with what is now widely recognized as one of the 25 best teams in America, the Iowa Hawkeyes, who are power rated top 20, top 25, depending on where you look. I think they're very underrated. That was a game that actually told me that Iowa was probably good, that they could go on the road at Rutgers, struggle, and yet come away and win by double digits. Rutgers then proceeded to lose to Minnesota, lose again to Washington. They got humiliated at home by Oregon. And after that, they kind of had to pick themselves off the mat, and they did. And they beat Purdue 27-24. This is a team whose strength is KJ Duff, Ian Strong, Ethan Kaliakmanis. In theory, their offensive line was supposed to be very good this year, but they've been dealing with injuries and just have not had any cohesion to be able to put forth a consistent effort. It reminds me a lot of what Georgia went through last year. Had plenty of good players in the offensive line, couldn't get anything going due to injuries, similar to what Ohio State suffered last year. That's what Rutgers' current situation is like. They just don't have the talent that Georgia or Ohio State did last year to really overcome that, and consequentially, along with a defense that's outside the top 130 in most metrics, they can't get anything going. They need every win that they can find, because at Ohio State is going to be tough, and Penn State and Maryland and even Illinois are power rated higher than Rutgers is. So they could realistically lose out and go 4-8, but they could also probably squeak by with some wins to close out the month of November. For Illinois, a team that feasts on turnovers, that knows how to win competitive contests, that's well coached and disciplined, but they are not perfect on either side of the ball, especially in the trenches on offense. And on defense, what they have hung their hat on under Brett Bielema for most of his time has been their secondary, whether that is under their current defensive coordinator or past defensive coordinator Ryan Walters, now defensive coordinator with the Washington Huskies, and Illinois' current defensive coordinator Aaron Henry has come under fire for the fact that they've been known for their secondary, and this year it is wildly underperforming. And while they're okay up front, good, I would even say, okay might be disrespectful, my bad on that, they are not great. Illinois isn't really great at anything outside of quarterback play and their top-end wide receivers. It's why they were able to beat USC. They were able to beat Purdue. They won their non-conference games. But it's also why Indiana destroyed them, Ohio State beat them down pretty hard, and Washington also beat them down pretty hard. They need a rebound here. Now they're on a 2-game losing streak. As for the key players and the matchups to talk about here, what I'm curious to see is whether or not Illinois can force the fact that they are the better team down Rutgers' throat, or if Rutgers can stay in this game because their passing offense should be able to take advantage of the Illinois secondary in the exact same way Illinois' passing offense should be able to take advantage of Rutgers' secondary. Both of these defenses match up pretty poorly against the strength of these offenses. Now, Rutgers' offense nor Illinois' are all that special, but in this specific matchup, I would expect them to put a bunch of points on the board. I don't think any of these DBs are equipped to deal with some of these top-end receivers whatsoever. I mean, whether it's Hank Beatty or Justin Bowick for Illinois, or whether it's KJ Duff or Ian Strong for Rutgers, and Luke Altmaier and Ethan Kaliakmanis, especially Altmaier, but also Kaliakmanis, have impressed me this year. They're going up against defenses that are outside the top 100 in points allowed per play. I mean, Ohio State hung points on them and was able to move the football methodically down the field in part due to turnovers, but also the fact that when they decided to pass the ball, they were able to shred this secondary. Indiana destroyed this Illinois secondary. Washington did as well. And then for Rutgers, we watched the Oregon game. Iowa, Mark Gronowski had one of his best games at Iowa from a passing standpoint against that Rutgers secondary, and Purdue was able to move the football on them consistently and sustainably. So these offenses should put up fireworks. This should be a shootout similar to what last year's game was. For Rutgers, pay attention to Ethan Kaliakmanis, KJ Duff, and Ian Strong. Defensively, look out for their defensive ends, Eric O'Neill and Jordan Walker, along with cornerback Bo Mesco. And for the Illini, very similar. Luke Altmaier and Hank Beatty, the QB1 wide receiver 1 combo for the Illini. Tackle J.C. Davis. He's been their best offensive lineman by a mile, probably their only good offensive lineman, their left tackle. Curious to see how he holds up and how the rest of the Illinois offensive line holds up, because Rutgers O-line and D-line, not so good, similar with Illinois. And when you have those type of underperforming units in the trenches, if just one of them shows up, the game can get out of hand pretty quickly. This game has a ton of variance to it. I don't feel comfortable picking it. But Illinois' defense, they got James Thompson Jr., Kurt Neal, Tamiwa, can't even read his last name on the screen, but one of their key defensive tackles, and then linebacker Dylan Rosiak. Plenty of good players on that defensive front for the Illinois Fighting Illini. I think that while Rutgers should, in theory, be able to keep up with Illinois and trade punches with them, Illinois has at least shown me that they are capable of running the ball and stopping the run, especially when they are at home. And I just don't think Rutgers is going to be all that great at it. Rutgers and Illinois should be able to pass the football effectively against each other, but Illinois should do a better job at game control. And I think Brett Bielema is a better staff than Greg Schiano and the better overall team. So I am going with Illinois to win and also Illinois to cover. Excuse me. Or Illinois to win and Rutgers to cover, actually. Although if there is one change I would have to make, it would be picking Illinois to cover. I think Illinois wins. I'm confident they win, about as confident as I can be between two average, mediocre Big Ten teams. I'm picking Rutgers to cover for the sake of 12.5 points being a big number in a game between two teams where there's a lot of variation. So Illinois, I think, should win by 2 scores, but 2 scores can mean 10 or 11 points. It doesn't have to be 13, 12, or 14. And even if it were 12, well, Rutgers then covers. So it's a safe bet for me that Illinois wins by 1 or 2 scores in most of those outcomes. That's Illinois winning, but the Scarlet Knights covering. In regards to the Big Ten standings, both of these teams are out of the college football playoff race, but Illinois is in a position to where they could finish in the top half of the Big Ten if, say, they win out, and there is a solid chance that they do. As for Rutgers, a win here can get them 1 win closer to bowl eligibility. They host Maryland and Penn State that sandwich the Ohio State game on the road in Week 13. So a win here makes 7-5 possible, and I think 7-5 with the schedule they were provided would be a successful season. Don't think they get it done this week, but perhaps next week or in the coming weeks, Rutgers can earn a win or 2 and go bowling. Another team fighting for bowl eligibility here that realistically, just based on odds, could pull off an upset is the Florida Gators. The 5th-ranked Georgia Bulldogs, national championship contenders, SEC contenders. They stand at 6-1, 4-1 in SEC conference play. They travel to Jacksonville, where Florida also travels to. It's a neutral site game, to face off against the 3-4, 2-2 Florida Gators. These teams are coming off a bye week, and I cannot stress enough that while the line, Georgia minus 7.5, could look fishy, as Georgia is power rated several more points than that ahead of Florida on a neutral field, this is a rivalry game, and they fired Napier entering the bye. I imagine that the potential for the interim head coach emotional boost, especially given the rivalry spot, could come into play here. So I want to caution people on that. This line is sketchy. It's sketchy for a reason. Both these teams are coming off a bye. We don't know how Florida is going to exactly play with Billy Gonzalez as the interim head coach. And Florida has shown that their defense can be a mean, nasty unit. And that Texas game showed that their offense has some oomph to it as well. I really think Florida's problems had more so to do with Napier than their personnel or even parts of their staff. Georgia, they're the favorite here. So I want to start off by talking about Florida, the underdog, and then move into talking about the favorite. With Florida, it's been a season of highs and lows. The high, obviously, beating Texas, top 10 Texas at home, and controlling and dominating most of that game. The lows being just about everything else. Losing to South Florida, losing to a mediocre LSU, losing to Miami, getting dominated by Texas A&M in the second half, barely beating Mississippi State, a game that Florida should have lost if not for Shapen throwing a pick. Florida has been poorly mismanaged, poorly coached. I was not one to think that Florida would go to the playoffs in the preseason, unlike many, but I did buy into the fact that they were talented enough to win 7 games, or maybe even 8 games in the regular season. That's probably not happening here, looking at the fact they have to play at Kentucky, at Ole Miss, they have to host Tennessee, and host Florida State, on top of playing Georgia Neutral Field. Even if they split those games, 5.5 wins, 6.5 losses, there's a chance that they go, they still miss a bowl game, even if they, win 2 of these final 5 games, and that would be impressive. Even if it were Florida State and Kentucky, the weakest of their remaining opponents, it would be impressive solely because of how tough this gauntlet has been. This is one of the toughest schedules in America. South Florida is one of the best G5 teams. LSU, I know, is overvalued, but Miami's a top 10 team. Texas is top 15, top 10 power ratings-wise. A&M's top 5 in power ratings. Georgia's close to that level, and Tennessee and Ole Miss are probably top 15, top 20 at the worst in power ratings. Florida has a massive opportunity here to not only get one step closer to bowl eligibility, but also spoil Georgia's season. Knocking off Georgia here would effectively push the Bulldogs out of the SEC championship game conversation, and it would make the rest of their schedule entirely made up of must-wins if they want to go to the college football playoff. For the Georgia Bulldogs, outside of that loss to Alabama at home, where Georgia did have a chance to win, they just bungled some opportunities. They've controlled Kentucky, controlled Auburn at the end of the day, were able to overcome Ole Miss, overcome Tennessee. They have had some close wins for sure. They are 2-1 right now in close games, and I would actually argue it's probably 3-1. That Auburn game was pretty close. This Georgia team, there's a chance they are overvalued relative to their ranking, and that priors and recruiting rankings and the logo carry more for them than their on-field results. That, I think, partially explains the 7.5-point line. This defense is the worst Kirby Smart defense that I can remember, outside of maybe his first year. Definitely his first year. The offense has improved from where it was last year, but the defense kind of cancels that out with how poor of a performance it's put on. Some key players to pay attention to in this matchup. For Florida, Jaden Baugh, Vernell Brown the third, Dallas Wilson, and center Jake Slaughter. Defensively, Miles Graham, Bryce Thornton, Devin Moore, Caleb Banks, and Tyreek Sapp if they are healthy. Pay attention to those players. For Georgia, Gunnar Stockton, Zachariah Branch, Drew Bobo. Know the names of those 3 offensive players. And defensively, it's Christian Miller at D-tackle, linebacker C.J. Allen, and safety K.J. Bolden. Florida is 125th in offensive points per play. I wonder if that changes against Georgia, as I know based on that Texas game and last year, Florida has the personnel to put up points. But Billy Napier was a terrible play caller. Defensively, Florida's allowing 0.344 points per play, which is 52nd. I sort of feel like after the A&M game, and with how poor Napier's play calling has been, at some point the defense quit. At one point in the year, they were playing as if they were a top 5 defense. I wonder if they return to playing at that level in this game. It's a rivalry spot. Florida has not beaten Georgia since 2020. They've never won in the Billy Napier era. They never will. But what if, under an interim head coach, a motivator, someone who's been a coach at Florida under Urban Meyer as a GA, or under both Dan Mullen and Billy Napier as a wide receivers coach, can they muster up enough energy to come through and earn a win in a big way? Florida, I do think they'll be able to get Georgia at times through the air, and they'll put up a good enough effort defensively to eliminate some threats that Georgia provides and limit how many points they score. But Georgia's staff is better, And Georgia's run defense, I think, is going to be the non-negotiable that really puts Florida as a round peg in a square hole. And that's where I think this game will be competitive for a half, 3/4, maybe even 4/4. But Georgia will win, and at some point they will pull away. I do have Georgia winning, but I do have Florida covering. I think that Georgia will win by a field goal or 7 points. If I'm wrong here, what will happen is the interim emotions will quickly blow over and Georgia will blow out Florida here. I do think Florida covers, and there is an okay chance that they pull off an upset here. But coaching and roster talent and fundamental soundness matters, and Georgia is better in all of those categories. As for the SEC standings, Georgia needs a win here to get a shot to go to Atlanta, and a win here certainly helps their odds at reaching the college football playoff. As really after this Florida game, and we looked over it, the only real challenge left on their schedule, I mean, maybe Mississippi State can be a challenge, but really the biggest challenge after this game would be Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech who may enter clean old-fashioned hate with an 11-0 record. 10-1 Georgia versus 11-0 Georgia Tech. That's something that we identified actually as a possibility in the preseason, and the fact that it's coming to fruition, that is amazing. As for Florida, a win here puts you at 4-4 with a winning record in the SEC, and your chances of going bowling, I think, become likely if you do somehow pull off an upset here. Again, I'm picking Georgia to win, but picking Florida to cover and keep this thing close. Moving on to Michigan State at Minnesota. The Michigan State Spartans, coming off a loss to rival Michigan, travel to the Minnesota Golden Gophers, who are coming off of a loss to rival Iowa. And honestly, Minnesota only being favored by 3.5 points makes total sense here. I know Michigan State's been pretty bad, and we'll talk about them for a few seconds and how bad they've been, but trust me, Minnesota isn't all that much better. Michigan State, after starting off 3-0, showing some promise on offense, has folded up like a lawn chair. They showed promise against USC, promise against Nebraska, but they quit against UCLA, tried to put up a good effort against Indiana, and it wasn't good enough. And it was the same thing with Michigan. Tried to put up a good effort, showed some encouraging things, but ultimately Michigan was the better team. They won. This is Michigan State's worst opponent since UCLA. And if you take out UCLA, it's their worst since Youngstown State. Michigan State, in theory, should be able to keep this game close if they give their best effort. So if they play against Michigan if they play against Minnesota how they did against Michigan or Indiana, they should actually win this game. The question is, can you count on Michigan State playing to that level after suffering defeat after defeat, and Jonathan Smith looks totally dejected and at a loss of words. PJ Fleck also looked like he was at a loss of words during that Iowa game. There were live bets that people were placing, I imagine, for Iowa to cover the -30.5 or -28.5 live line that was up at one point in the second quarter against Minnesota. I mean, Iowa took pedal to the metal there. And Minnesota's worst loss to Iowa in probably over a decade was suffered last Saturday. I thought Iowa was going to win that game fairly dominantly, in the same way they did last year where they won by 17. That's kind of what I thought Iowa was going to do here, maybe in the 20s, but winning by 38 points and it being 31-0 at the half, the game's already over in the second quarter. That was, I mean, look at Michigan, look at Minnesota and how they lost to Ohio State 42-3, or how Michigan State lost to UCLA 38-13. Like, this was a bad loss, and I wonder where Minnesota's psyche is. And we'll find out quickly. 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 2:30 p.m. local time will be broadcast on the Big Ten Network. But this line being where it is makes sense. It's a tell that confidence leans towards Minnesota winning, especially since they're at home. But neutral field, these two teams are equal, and there isn't much confidence in either of them. We already talked about how Rutgers versus Illinois will have a lot of variation because it's two mediocre Power 4 teams. Rutgers early in the year, though, not really much so now, and Illinois for much of the year has showed the capability of playing at an above average or even good level at spurts. Minnesota nor Michigan State, outside of probably one game each on their schedule, I would say Michigan State against Nebraska in that third quarter, and Minnesota against Nebraska 2 Fridays ago, have shown anything else than being below average, bad, or even awful Power 4 teams. I mean, Minnesota's outside the top 100 in points per play scored. Michigan State's outside the top 100. Actually, both are outside the top 110th in scoring offense per play. That's Minnesota. And for Michigan State, they're outside of the top 110 in scoring defense in terms of points allowed per play. Yikes. Something has to give here. And then Minnesota's defense is 73rd in points allowed per play, allowing 0.383. Michigan State only scores 0.385 points per play, which is 76th. So this will probably be a sloppy game. Could be high scoring. Could be cancerously low scoring. Could just be anything, really. Both quarterbacks, Aiden Giles and Drake Lindsey, I'll be paying extra close attention to. Neither had a good game last week, but Giles' performance was far better than Lindsey. Lindsey looked like a high schooler going up against, like, Caleb Downs and the best of every Ohio State secondary combined over the past 20 years. That's how bad the performance was. Like, you have Jeff Okudah, you have Denzel Burke at his best, you have current Igbinosun, and then you have, like, peak Fuller and Downs, and I don't probably know enough to put any other name up there. But if you're a college football historian who knows everything about the Ohio State secondary, take the best from that group against a high school quarterback, and that's what Drake Lindsey looked like against an Iowa secondary that's getting better and better every game. Nick Marsh, wide receiver for MSU, pay attention to him. Same with center Matt Gulbin. And for Minnesota, pay attention to running back Darius Taylor and wide receiver Javon Tracy. Defensively, for Michigan State, it's all about David Santiago, Wayne Matthews III, and corner Malcolm Bell. And for Minnesota, it's Maverick Baranowski and safeties Kerry Brown and Coy Parrish. The matchups here, I think, mostly favor Minnesota, but one area where I expect Michigan State to absolutely dominate is rushing defense. Michigan State isn't elite there. They're not even great. I know that statistically they're pretty poor, but I actually think they do a good job stopping the run. Against Michigan, Indiana, early on, Nebraska, at times USC, but not really. Really in against Nebraska, Indiana, and Michigan, they were able to hold their own in run defense very early. They just break down throughout the game because they're not very deep, and the offense is not exactly great at controlling the game. So initially, at least, I think that Drake Lindsey will have to play at a high level if Minnesota wants to put any offense on the board. The problem for Michigan State is I have no idea if they're going to be able to put offense on the board after defeat, and then having to make a trip to a Minnesota team that has played much better defensively at home than on the road. Their worst defensive performances of the year were against Ohio State on the road, California on the road, and either Iowa on the road or maybe Purdue at home. But at Purdue at home, they held to 20. Iowa could have put up way more points offensively if they wanted to run it up, but the game was already in hand, so they pulled out the basic playbook and just continued to control the game that way. I am picking Michigan State to lose for the 6th straight game in a row. I'm picking Minnesota to bounce back with a win. I believe that Minnesota wins and that Minnesota will cover that 3.5 point line. Just do not know where Michigan State's psyche is, and I think Minnesota to this point has a dramatically better culture than the Spartans do. As for the Big Ten standings, Minnesota is 5-3, 3-2. A win here can propel their hopes of maybe having an 8-4 season forward, because I don't think you're beating Oregon Friday night on the road. You might compete there for a minute or two, but you won't beat them. I mean, look at the Ohio State and Iowa game. How are you going to be able to compete with Oregon, for example? But 8-4 would be a successful season for Minnesota. If you're Michigan State and Jonathan Smith, you need a win here. If you win this game and you're 4-5, 1-5, wins over Penn State at home and Maryland at home all of a sudden seem within your reach. And then if you go bowling, maybe the conversations about Jonathan Smith are different. But a loss here, I think, would certainly get Jonathan Smith fired, as Michigan State has a bye after this game. And that's what I think happens. I think Minnesota wins, they cover, and for Michigan State, I don't think Jonathan Smith, as of right now, will be the head coach of the Spartans next year. Now we can look at Purdue traveling to Michigan. This will be a quick preview. Same with Utah versus Cincinnati. Let me check the comment section, the live chat, see what any of you are saying, if at all. Oh, we actually have good concurrent viewers. Cool. Well, thank you guys for coming on. We're not going to be live for more than like 15 minutes here. I actually have a show that I'm doing with Juck on Bucks here in 28 minutes. So I do have to do some preparation for that. Yeah. I wanted this show to be longer, but we had that later start. At least getting these previews out to you all. Purdue travels to 21st ranked Michigan. It's going to be a 7 p.m. Eastern time kickoff on the Big Ten Network. Michigan favored by 21.5 points against a Purdue team that is still searching for their first Big Ten win in coming up on 2 full seasons. Purdue, they have only 2 close losses in Big Ten play to a Minnesota and Rutgers team that in FPI are hanging right around that 0 power rating. About the average college football team. Purdue is a below average FBS team. They are one of the worst Power 4 teams. Much better coached than they were last year. Give a much better effort. Put up a tougher fight. But Ryan Walters left that locker room and that roster in a rough position. And now Barry Odom. Bless me. Bless me. Oh my gosh, that was bad. And now Barry Odom has to clean up that mess, and it's going to take him longer than just 1 whole season to do that. As for Michigan, the Wolverines are ranked 21st. They earned bowl eligibility this past weekend, in a 31-20 win over Michigan State. They have 1 close win. That's it. They got blown out by USC. Oklahoma controlled that game. Only close wins on the road against Nebraska. Best win of the year is beating Washington 24-7. This team is getting better. They're more complete. They're more together. Defensively, they're tightening up week over week over week. Michigan is a bye after this game, and a strong win here would be needed to inspire confidence entering in that final stretch in November against Northwestern, Maryland, and of course, Ohio State. Michigan here, they have some issues with their receivers, obviously, catching the ball. Purdue is a team that loves to throw it around, and Michigan has some young DBs, some health concerns there, some inconsistencies for sure. But with all that being said, Michigan, I think, can match Purdue in terms of coaching. Sharon Moore has actually impressed me as a coach these past 2 weeks. He's gotten better. Not saying he's good. He's just not as bad as he was last year or earlier in the year. And Michigan should be able to do a good enough job defending Purdue's passing offense and passing the ball in Purdue themselves to where, with their ability to control the ground game against Purdue, they should be able to win, and win in a fairly dominant fashion. So I'm picking Michigan to win. I'm also picking them to cover the spread here, and I would expect a bounce-back game from Bryce Underwood and Andrew Marsh. Almost said Nick Marsh. Maybe future Michigan wide receiver Nick Marsh. We'll see. Andrew Marsh and Donovan McCulley. Michigan's defense here, they might be able to pitch a shootout. Wouldn't predict it, but they might be able to. Purdue's banged up. Purdue has been on a 6-game losing streak now. Northwestern was able to shut them out. Wouldn't be shocked if Michigan won this game, say, 41 or 45 or even 49-0 in a similar fashion they did the Central Michigan game. I would not be shocked by that. As for the Big Ten standings here, Michigan's path to Indianapolis in the college football playoff is still alive. They just have to win out. For Purdue, an upset here would be absolutely monumental. I'm just not picking it to happen. I think the odds of that happening are incredibly low. If Michigan's losing to anyone except Ohio State, it would then go down to probably Maryland, then Northwestern. I have a very hard time seeing Purdue win, let alone compete in this game. And last but not least, looking at Cincinnati traveling to Utah. The 17th ranked, red hot on a 7-game win streak, Cincinnati Bearcats travel to the 24th ranked Utah Utes, who actually, they're no longer 7.5-point favorites, they're 9.5-point favorites. What's up with that? Utah has 2 losses in Big 12 play. Cincinnati is undefeated there. The story of Cincinnati, after competing with Nebraska, nearly having a game-winning drive, and then losing, and ever since that bouncing back and running all over people, has been nothing short of incredible. For Utah, they are the top power-rated team in the Big 12 per FPI, and they're power-rated top 15 there. And if they win out and some other chaos happens, their path to the Big 12 championship game in the college football playoff is certainly still alive. So let's check out Cincinnati. Looking at their schedule here, they played it tough with Bowling Green, Kansas on the road. Should have beaten Iowa State by more than they did, but Iowa State was scrappy, attempted to come back, hit a 9-point win over UCF, destroyed Oklahoma State, was able to pull away from Baylor after Baylor attempted to come back last Saturday. And now here we are. And Cincinnati has a really big opportunity to cement their path to the Big 12 championship game. If they beat Utah on the road, there's no reason why they shouldn't beat Arizona, why they shouldn't beat BYU at home, and why they shouldn't beat TCU on the road. Utah is their toughest test in the month of November. Looking at their entire schedule, at Utah was, from a preseason standpoint, I thought was going to be their toughest game. But even from a regular season standpoint, Utah will be their toughest game of the entire season. If they win this game, they can beat everyone else on their schedule, and at 11-1, entering the Big 12 championship game, especially if Nebraska wins more games, maybe they're in the college football playoff anyway. We'll see. We shall see. BYU winning, and Kansas and Iowa State haven't looked so hot. Baylor nor Oklahoma State have. But Nebraska, it's a solid non-conference game. As for Utah, some maybe thought they had a solid non-conference opponent against UCLA, but UCLA's bad. They destroyed them. They've destroyed everyone except the 2 teams they've lost to. Texas Tech at home and BYU on the road. That is why they're power rated highly. They beat up on the weak, on the mediocre, the above average, beating up on Arizona State in that way, even though Arizona State had Jeff Sims I thought was pretty impressive. Same with what they did to Colorado. Their game against BYU was even impressive. They lost the turnover margin and the 4th down conversion margin by quite a bit and were in a position to win. BYU just owns that rivalry. That's why they've won 3 straight under Kalani Sitake over Kyle Whittingham. And for Texas Tech, they were in that game. Tech just had the better roster. I think they had the better game plan, and I think the backup quarterback coming in kind of threw them off a little bit towards the end there. But this is a highly effective roster. I think it's clearly the second best roster in the Big 12 behind Texas Tech. And they actually have a future at quarterback beyond Devin Dampier. This is a solid program, very developmentally sound. If Utah had the resources Texas Tech did, or Oregon did, or USC did, or some of their current Big 12 comrades or past Pac-12 comrades had, I imagine Whittingham could have won a national title with Utah. That's how much respect I have for him and his staff and the operation of Utah. If Utah wins this game pretty convincingly, there's no reason they shouldn't win out as well. So the winner of this game, I think, has a very good chance of winning at least 10 games. If you're Cincinnati, obviously you have a chance at winning 11. Let's look at this roster matchup and the coaching matchup. So Cincinnati's passing offense with Sorsby has been effective, but Utah with Lander Barton, with their edges, with Rabbit Evans, with their secondary, is going to be a totally different task. For example, think about Nebraska and their secondary and how Cincinnati could not pass on them, and how for a while they statistically held on to a top 5 spot in yards allowed per pass attempt, passer rating allowed, passing yards allowed per game. They held on to that. They held steady. Utah's secondary and backfield is just as talented, if not more talented, than Nebraska's. Their defense overall is a better unit. So I have a hard time seeing Cincinnati pass the football effectively here. As for Cincinnati's rushing offense, I think they should be able to push this Utah rush defense a little bit. Not to the same degree they did in Nebraska, though. And Utah's offense should be able to move the ball against the Cincinnati defense that schematically is effective, but I just don't think has the players to be a good defense. I also trust Utah's staff, roster, and head coach more than I do Cincinnati's. I'm on Utah pretty big here. I think Utah will cover, whether it's 7.5, 9.5. I don't think any number below 14 is big enough here. Cincinnati has been a great story. They're probably going to win every game after this game, but this is a rough spot. I think it's a 10:45 p.m. or maybe 10:15 p.m. I forget which one exactly. Local, or Eastern time kick. Yeah, it's 10:15 Eastern time kick. And for Utah, it's going to be, 8:15 local. Cincinnati, 10:15 local. So Utah has the travel edge, the bodily clock edge. They have several matchup edges. I love Utah here to win, and win big, and that will keep them alive in the Big 12 championship race, where you got Houston, Texas Tech tied for third at 4-1, and Cincinnati and BYU were tied for first. Knock off Cincy, well, they're tied now for second with Tech and Houston, assuming they win, and Utah's in that next position to, get up into that next category if there's more chaos that happens. And as for BYU, they got to play Texas Tech. Someone's going to lose there, and if Utah wins out, Tech will either be bumped down into a tiebreaker situation with Utah, or BYU will be one loss away from also being tied with Utah. So Utah is still in this thing. They're still in the college football playoff race, and the fact that they are respected in the power ratings as much as they are will also help their case to get into the college football playoff. Say if they're 10-2 and a bunch of chaos happens in November, maybe they get the 11th seed and the Big 12 gets 2 teams in. We'll see. But this is a proud team. It's a team that I love. I also love Cincinnati. Those are both incredible stories this year. But I think Utah's going to win, and I wouldn't be shocked if they won in a dominant fashion. And that's all for today. I got to get to prepare for my show with Juck. It won't be live, but it will be recorded, uploaded, I'm going to say tomorrow morning. I also have a show with a Colorado and Indiana guy. Runs his own channel on YouTube that I really respect, breaks down film. Just discovered him very recently and thought I would bring him on to talk a little bit about Indiana, since I have tremendous respect for Indiana and he studies them. So I gotta get going to prepare for that. But these clips for these 5 games will be up all today at some point. Some will probably be posted after 7. Well, all of them will be posted at the very earliest at 7 or after that. Thank you guys so much for coming on. I appreciate you all. Have a great day.